Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I will be presenting a little bit on the opportunities and investment framework in Cameroon. And I've structured this presentation to address four main issues. The first would be the investment climate in Cameroon. How can it be best described? And also, if Cameroon is a high potential market. And the second issue I'm going to be addressing is economic and fiscal reforms to attract investment. And the third aspect I'm going to be delving on would be investment opportunities and economic diversification. And the fourth would be constraints and investment security. First of all, for us to assess Cameroon's investment climate, we must do it with a lot of clarity, a lot of objectivity, and a lot of responsibility. Because many a times, people without statistics say a lot of things that really do not match with what the government is doing or has put in place. Cameroon is indeed a high potential market, but also an evolving environment. The current reality is that of a country engaged in a dynamic process of deep structural reforms aimed at progressively removing long-standing constraints on investment. Cameroon's investment climate is improving progressively and steadily. This assessment is not arbitrarily done. It is based on tangible progress observed at the institutional, regulatory, and infrastructural levels. While challenges remain, this positive trajectory reflects the sustained commitment of public authorities to align the business environment with international standards. Cameroon stands at a strategic crossroad in Central Africa, with a diversified economic base, a growing population, and access to regional markets within the CEMAC region. The country offers significant long-term opportunities. However, like many emerging economies, it combines strong potential and structural complexities. Let's talk about growth. Growth has been very resilient, averaging between 3.1 and 3.5 between 2021 and 2025, despite global shocks and despite domestic constraints. While this remains a major problem, the constraints we are still making enough efforts to meet our targets. Our targets are quite ambitious, but again, the results and the statistics I have just given you reflect a stable macroeconomic foundation. And the real challenge that we have is how to accelerate growth by unlocking investment at scale. Now, let's talk from the macroeconomic standpoint. We will talk a little bit about the GDP. Growth is approximately estimated at 3.5% in 2024 and approximately at 3.1 in 2025. And as a norm, so far within the CEMAC region, we know that inflation is contained at a level of 3%, and we're working hard to making sure that we bring that level low. But again, this reflects a relatively stable economy. Now, from an investment perspective, we'll talk about gross capital formation. In Cameroon, this is relatively around 21.4% of the GDP, which is close to global averages. However, external investments remain very low. For instance, we have FDIs, foreign direct investments, which are estimated at about 1.8% of our GDP, and it poses a bit of a problem because when you compare this within the global average brackets, which is at 3%, we realize that Cameroon is low. And what does this tell us? It reveals a very clear structural reality, And what is that? It shows that Cameroon demonstrates solid domestic investment momentum, but very low on foreign direct investments. So we are not attracting enough international capital. And concluding on this particular point on the investment climate and also about Cameroon's position as a high potential market, we would conclude by saying that in practical terms, Cameroon offers strong fundamentals. As a fact, we stand in a strategic geographic position as a gateway to some landlocked countries within the CEMAC region. We have abundant natural resources from oil to gas to mining to agriculture. And we have large and maybe very huge ongoing infrastructure expansion in ports, in energy, and even in transport. However, investors still face operational constraints. We have administrative bottlenecks, perceived governance and transparency issues, legal and regulatory uncertainty in some cases. But I must conclude that the reality, therefore, can be nuanced. Cameroon is not necessarily a high-risk destination, but it remains a high-effort investment environment. The ongoing reforms aim precisely to reduce that effort and increase predictability. Now, the second aspect I'm going to be talking about would be the economic and fiscal reforms that have been put in place to attract investment. Cameroon has undertaken several important reforms to improve its investment attractiveness. And some of the key measures include our union with the World Bank. We have the Economic and Financial Program with the International Monetary Fund, which Cameroon has committed to carrying out a series of structural reforms aimed at reducing investment costs, supporting priority sectors, and improving competitiveness. First of all, we'll talk about the investment incentives. These are sector-specific tax incentives or tax benefits, especially in priority sectors like agriculture, energy, and manufacturing. And the most emblematic is that of 2025. We had the ordinance of 2025 that amended the 2023 law on tax incentives. And this law kind of modernizes the incentive framework and has established a more unified reference for both public and private investments in Cameroon, thereby consolidating the investment scheme. It defines a single institutional framework for investment today, and its objective is to provide greater clarity, stability, and competitiveness. We'll talk about the recapitalization of the SNI, which is the investment company in Cameroon. So this is a strategic public action which is being retooled to catalyze private capital, enabling co-investment with the private and the public sector. And it's targeting very high impact sectors. So now the private sector can join with the public sector and they invest. The government itself can inject into a private company and all that. SNI acts like a special purpose vehicle for that. We also have tax modernization, which is very important. We have digitization of the tax administration, we have simplification of tax procedures, and we have improved taxpayer services. Today, we have tax reforms that are underway to improve tax neutrality, secure the relationship between the tax administration and the taxpayers, and also to enhance transparency. The digitization of the tax administration, particularly through online filing and payment platforms, is also a very key component for digital transformation and for economic transformation. Now we're going to talk about public finance management reforms. There's been enhanced transparency and budget discipline. So the government is putting in a lot to make sure that government spending is reduced. And they have also strengthened the PPP framework to facilitate private participation in infrastructure. strengthening of public finance management. We also now have the law on economic zones. We have fiscal measures that have been put in place to revitalize the economically distressed zones. Together, these reforms send a very strong and positive signal to investors and demonstrates a clear commitment to strengthening Cameroon's attractiveness and modernizing its business environment. However, the key challenge is not only designing reforms, but ensuring effective implementation and consistency over time. Predictability is what investors value most, and the objective is clear: to move from an administrative logic to a service-oriented approach in support of investment. In essence, therefore, and I conclude, the reform agenda reflects a clear shift. Like I said earlier in my opening remarks, there is an intentional paradigm shift and a different vision that the government holds today when it comes to public investment and it comes to FDIs, from an administrative logic to a service-oriented investment facilitation approach. The third issue that I intend to address, and I'm about to do that, is the investment opportunities and economic diversification. We see, I remember the governor of Bayak said something, and I quote, he said, "Notre économie se diversifie peu à peu." And it's a fact that measures have been put in place, and we are seeing that the economy is getting diversified. We know with the issues of Sonora today, we as a government and we as a people and we as a nation have seen the weaknesses that we have depending on the oil sector. And so Cameroon's strategic priority right now is clear: transition from a resource-based economy to a value-added industrial economy. This is where sustainable growth and higher returns will be generated. The diversification, therefore, is not a theory. It is already shaping the country's growth trajectory. Economic diversification lies at the heart of our strategy. It aims to reduce dependence on extractive resources and strengthen the resilience of growth as a model. Cameroon has a diversified potential that goes beyond the oil sector. From an investor's perspective, studies conducted by the Ministry of Economy have identified 9 priority sectors under the National Development Strategy of 2020-2030, namely the energy sector, agro-industry, digital economy, forestry and wood processing, construction, professional, scientific and technical services and non-financial services, textile, clothing and leather, mining and steel, hydrocarbons, petrochemicals and refining, chemicals and pharmaceuticals. In addition, emerging opportunities are increasingly visible in information and communication technologies. I'll give you a bit of statistics. The agribusiness in Cameroon, transformation of cocoa is taking height, coffee, palm oil, and food crops. This is supported by rising agricultural output. And for those who know a little bit about PISA, the government has injected a lot of money into the Banque de PME to assist farmers, especially those who deal with palm oil and those who cultivate rice and even fish. We have energy. Hydropower development, gas to power projects remain a priority. Expansion of electricity investments to eventually support industrialization. Infrastructure and logistics. There is port modernization, urban infrastructure, and regional trade corridors that are being worked on. Mining, iron ore, bauxite, and other untapped reserves expected to significantly contribute to medium-term growth, with projections already reaching 4.6% by 2030. Forestry and green economy. One of the world's richest forestry ecosystems is Cameroon. And we have estimated natural capital value exceeding 553 billion USD. Strong potential for sustainable and carbon-related investments. We have the digital economy, which is taking height, fintech expansion, telecommunications, digital services driven by strong domestic demand. From Cameroon's perspective, Cameroon's economic diversification is often described as Africa in miniature. It remains a major resilience factor, and this diversification spans multiple dimensions: sectoral, cultural, product-based, geographic, and market diversifications. If there is something we must note, is that the tertiary sector is currently growing at a faster pace than the primary and the secondary sectors, as heightened in the midterm evaluation of the SND30. The overarching objective, therefore, is to move from exporting raw materials to producing and exporting value-added goods and services. This justifies our diversification. The fourth issue that I earlier said I was going to raise was the constraints, were the constraints on investment and investment security. Despite the progress that I have enumerated, we still have issues within our investment framework. We have structural challenges, and investors have been very clear. I think from all the presentations this morning, it has been a red flag. And some of the things that we identify go beyond our macro indicators. We have non-financial constraints and equally important structural constraints. And studies conducted by the Investment Promotion Agency and partner institutions identify 4 main constraints affecting the effective implementation of investments: limited access to reliable and sufficient energy for large-scale industrial deployment, regulatory complexities, difficulties in accessing land, insufficient infrastructure, particularly roads and project sites, administrative complexity, and procedure delays. These factors explain the gap between Cameroon's strong potential and actual investment inflows. It is important, therefore, to recognize that investment does not exist domestically. At over 21% of GDP, it is important to recognize that our investment goes above 21% of our GDP, which demonstrates internal confidence. However, the lower levels of foreign direct investments heightens the need for stronger guarantees for external investors. Ensuring stability of tax and legal frameworks, accelerating dispute resolution mechanisms, strengthening arbitration and enforcement systems, improving consistency between policy design and effective implementation. Ultimately, the issue is not opportunity. It is confidence, it is predictability, and it is execution. Regarding investment security, several mechanisms have been established. These include the provisions under the 2025 ordinance, notably the creation of an audit and appeal committee in Article 39, as well as recourse through judicial authorities to strengthen investor predictions and protection. And I know there is an aspect that people have always spoken about, and especially our investors, is about energy, which poses a very, very difficult situation for industries. But again, I would like to say something concerning the energy sector in our country. The financial equilibrium of the energy sector remains a central challenge. In context, this sector is deficit-ridden, characterized by high demands and less supply, persistent reliance on state subsidies, and other inefficiencies across the entire value chain, from generation to transmission to distribution. And the government is aware. And earlier today, we said we want to be frank about our discussions and about our constraints. In response to this, the government has undertaken a strategy to diversify the energy mix and strengthen the sector's resilience and sustainability. Clear push towards renewable energy, especially through the development of solar photovoltaic solutions in the northern part of Cameroon. Thermal power generations have been reinforced, notably through key infrastructures like KPDC and DPPC in Kribi and Dibamba, respectively. And the government is accelerating the hydroelectric development, leveraging more and more on the country's natural potential. Large-scale projects are being pursued to ensure a more stable, cost-effective, and sustainable energy supply. In other words, the problems that we are facing remain very important and are considered very important by our institutions. I'll conclude my conversation or my exchange with you with okay. So my concluding message would be Cameroon does not lack opportunities. It is actively working to refine the environment in which these opportunities can be realized. For long-term and strategic investors, this is a market where early positioning matters. The reforms are underway, and we are out to attract capital. We are also building a more resilient, diversified, and competitive economy. The direction is clear. The challenge now is execution, and that is where the national focus is now concentrated. Thank you very much for your attention.